I didn't want to be the kind of man who lets things slip through his fingers, who waits until it's too late to fix something important. But the truth is, that's exactly who I had become. And maybe I should have been more aware of that sooner. The truth doesn't hit you all at once, does it? It comes in pieces, and you ignore the pieces, hoping they'll fit together in the end. But when they do, it's too late to glue them back. The night I realized everything was falling apart, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a half-empty glass of water. The clock on the wall was ticking louder than it had ever seemed to tick before. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt like it was echoing off the walls, and I couldn't escape it. I hadn't slept in days. There was a weight on my chest, something pressing down, something I couldn't ignore anymore. And then she walked in. Her footsteps were soft on the wood floor, almost calculated, like she didn't want to disturb the silence. Nora, my wife of 5 years, stood there for a moment, looking at me, not saying a word. She didn't even bother with a greeting. She never did anymore. Not that it mattered. A greeting had long since become a formality, a distant memory of a time when we were more than just two people occupying the same space. "How was your day?" I asked, the question sounding ridiculous even as it left my mouth. It wasn't a question anymore. It was just a habit, a routine. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her arms crossed in a way that suggested she was already done with whatever conversation we were about to have. "Not great," she said, her voice cold. "I need to talk to you about something." I could tell it was serious by the way her voice dropped, but I couldn't have known how serious it would get. I didn't know this was the moment I'd been avoiding for so long. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. "Go ahead," I said, finally looking up at her. "Look, I've been thinking," she started, her gaze never meeting mine. "I think you need to make a decision. Either you do something about this, or you don't." "About what?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "About us." Her words landed like a slap. "You keep pretending like you don't know what's happening here, like you don't feel it too. But I know you do." I looked at her, but all I saw was a stranger. A stranger who once was the love of my life, but who, over time, had become someone I barely recognized. "Don't make this about me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about you, Nora? What have you been doing? What's been going on with you?" She didn't flinch, didn't bat an eye. She just stood there, looking at me with those cold, emotionless eyes. "I've been trying to make it work. I've been patient. But you? You've been too afraid to face the truth. You've been too afraid to make a decision. You've been too afraid to leave." I felt a fire start to build inside of me. "You think I'm afraid?" I asked, my voice rising without warning. "You think that's what's been going on? I've been trying to hold this together, Nora. I've been trying to figure out how to save this." She shook her head, a small, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "No, you haven't. You've been too comfortable, too scared to rock the boat. You're not the man I married anymore. You're just stagnant." Her words hit harder than I expected. Each one pierced through me like a knife, and I wanted to scream, to fight back, to say something. Anything, to prove her wrong. But she was right. I had been too comfortable, too complacent. "You want me to leave, don't you?" I said, the words tasting like poison as they left my mouth. I didn't know why I said it. Maybe I was trying to convince myself it wasn't true. But as soon as the question hung in the air, I realized how foolish it sounded. She didn't answer at first, and for a moment, the silence was suffocating. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the edge to it. "You're too afraid to leave," she said, her words flat and resigned. "You've been saying it for months, but you never actually do anything. You just keep talking, keep making excuses, keep pretending like things will fix themselves." I was stunned. This wasn't the woman I had known. This wasn't the Nora I had fallen in love with. She was cold, indifferent, like she had already checked out. And then it hit me. The thought that had been sitting in the back of my mind for so long, but that I hadn't been willing to acknowledge. She was done. She had already given up on us, and I hadn't even seen it. The truth hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. I wasn't just fighting for our marriage anymore. I was fighting to keep a ghost that had already walked away. But something in me snapped. "If you think I'm too afraid to leave," I said, my voice low but steady, "then I'll show you just how wrong you are." I got up from the table and walked into the study, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't sit there anymore and let her have the upper hand. I couldn't let her think she controlled me. I opened the drawer, pulled out the divorce papers I had printed weeks ago, just in case, and walked back into the kitchen. I laid them down in front of her. She looked at the papers, her expression unreadable. And for the first time in months, I saw something flicker in her eyes. It wasn't surprise, exactly, but it was something close to it. "Is this really happening?" she asked quietly, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "Yeah," I said, my voice firm. "It is." She didn't speak after that. She just sat there, looking at the papers. I could feel the weight of the moment. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid to let go, and I wasn't afraid to walk away. She didn't say anything after that. Neither of us did. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit in that suffocating silence any longer. I had finally made my decision. The tension in the room was unbearable. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the divorce papers like they were some kind of alien object, as if the idea of them had never occurred to her. It was almost like she was waiting for me to take it all back, to tell her that I didn't mean it, that this was just another one of my stupid emotional outbursts. But this time, I wasn't backing down. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was something cold in her tone, something almost disappointed, as if I'd failed her by not following the script. She stood up slowly, walking around the table to where the papers lay. "I thought you'd just keep pretending," she continued, still not looking at me. "You always do. You let things slide, and I get to do whatever I want. But this is new." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. She wasn't wrong, though. I had let things slide. I had been too passive, too afraid to disrupt the little bubble we'd built around ourselves. But not anymore. I stood there, watching her trace her fingers along the edge of the divorce papers, and in that moment, I realized how much she had changed. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the woman I had promised to spend my life with. I didn't know when it happened, but I had been living with a version of her who had already checked out. The signs had been there. I had just refused to see them. "You think you're in control of this, don't you?" I asked, my voice steady, but something was shifting inside me. Maybe it was the hurt, maybe it was the anger, or maybe it was just the realization that I was finally ready to let go. She turned to face me then, her eyes narrowing, but there was something different in them. The coldness wasn't there anymore, replaced by something else. Was it fear? Regret? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't want us to get here, but you made it impossible." I shook my head, the anger bubbling to the surface again. "You never tried to fix it, Nora. You just let it all slip away. And now, here we are, and you're telling me you didn't want this? That's a lie. You wanted this. You wanted to push me to the edge and see if I'd finally snap. Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted." The words were out before I could stop them, and once I said them, I regretted it. But it didn't matter anymore. What was done was done. The truth was out there, ugly and raw. She didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the floor, clearly trying to gather her thoughts. I didn't know if she was planning her defense, or if she was just coming to terms with the reality of it all. Either way, the silence between us felt suffocating. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked me in the eyes. "You think leaving is going to make things better?" she asked. "You think running away will fix anything?" I met her gaze head on. "I don't think it'll fix anything. But it's the only thing left to do. If we keep going like this, we'll both just keep pretending, and it'll get worse. I'm done pretending." Her face softened, just for a second, like she was about to say something, but then she stopped herself. She took a step back, running a hand through her hair, clearly lost in thought. "I don't know what you want from me anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this, if it's even possible." "You don't have to fix anything, Nora," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm the one who needs to fix it now. I need to fix myself." There was a long pause, and I watched her eyes flicker, like she was weighing something in her mind. She looked at the papers again, then at me, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something resembling guilt in her eyes. But it was gone before I could be sure. "You think this is over, don't you?" she asked, her voice full of uncertainty. "You think if you sign those papers, everything will just disappear?" I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this, caught in the middle of a relationship that was slowly choking the life out of me. I don't know, I said finally, but I'm willing to find out. The silence between us stretched on, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was final, like we had both come to the same conclusion without saying it aloud. Nora stood there, her gaze flickering between the divorce papers and my face, almost like she was trying to decipher something. You really think it's over, don't you? She said, her voice low, as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. You think signing those papers means you're free? I didn't reply at first. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept that it was really over, that the life I thought I was building with Nora was slipping away faster than I could hold on to it. But what else could I do? How long could I keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? Finally, I looked up at her, locking eyes for the first time in what felt like years. I don't think signing the papers fixes anything, I said quietly, my voice firm but tired. But it's the only way out. I've tried everything else. I've tried talking. I've tried waiting. But you've already made up your mind, haven't you? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked past me, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. For a second, I thought she was going to leave the room, maybe even leave the house. But she didn't. She stopped at the window, looking out into the dark night, the light from the street lamps casting long shadows across her face. How did we get here? She asked, almost to herself. How did we go from being happy to this mess? I didn't know how to answer that. How had we gotten here? I'd spent so many nights trying to figure it out, trying to find the exact moment when everything had started to fall apart. But the truth was, I couldn't pinpoint it. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. I had been too passive. She had been too distant. We both had let it happen, and now we were here, standing in this room, with a pile of divorce papers between us, staring at the wreckage of a life we had tried to build together. I don't know, I said finally, my voice quiet. But I can't keep pretending. I can't keep pretending like I don't see the truth. Nora didn't say anything in response. Instead, she turned back to me, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was something raw in them now, something that had been missing before. Regret? Fear? Maybe both. Do you really think you'll be happier without me? She asked, her voice trembling just a little. Do you really think that walking away will make everything better? Her words hit harder than I expected. I had thought about this moment 1,000 times. I had imagined it in my head a dozen different ways, but none of those scenarios had prepared me for this. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know what happens next, but I do know that staying like this is destroying both of us. I can't keep living in this, in between. Nora looked down at the papers again, as if weighing her options, but I knew she had already made her decision. She just wasn't ready to admit it. Maybe you're right, she whispered after a long silence. Maybe it's too late. I didn't know what to say to that. The words felt hollow, like a door closing softly behind us. But it was the truth, wasn't it? It was too late. The love we had once shared had faded into something unrecognizable. The connection was gone. And so, we stood there, two strangers in a marriage that had already ended. Neither of us knew what would happen next, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The room felt colder as the minutes passed. Every second seemed to drag, suffocating us both in a silence that was deafening. Nora stood there, her fingers still brushing against the divorce papers, her mind clearly 1,000 miles away. I could see her trying to piece together everything that had led to this moment, but I knew she wasn't going to find an answer that would make it any easier. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the stillness. But what was there to say? The words had already been spoken. The reality was already clear. We were at the end of the line, and there was no more pretending that things were fine. Finally, Nora spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You really think I'm the one who ruined everything, don't you? I wasn't sure how to answer that. It wasn't just her fault. It was mine too. We had both let things slip. We had both stopped trying, stopped caring, stopped communicating. But at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. The words were trapped somewhere deep inside me, buried beneath the weight of everything that had happened. I don't know, I said, my voice strained. Maybe we both did. Maybe we both gave up on each other. Nora looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. It was a fleeting moment, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it shook me to my core. She wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't the cold, indifferent woman who had been walking through this marriage for months. There was something else there, something real. I didn't want this to happen, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I didn't want to hurt you. I almost didn't know how to respond. The words felt hollow, like she was trying to convince both of us of something that wasn't true. But in that moment, I saw the pain behind her words. She had been as lost as I had been, trying to find a way out of a relationship that no longer made sense. I know, I said, my voice softening. But I can't keep pretending like we're okay when we're not. She nodded, slowly, almost as if she were conceding defeat. But she wasn't angry. There was no fire in her eyes, no defensiveness. She seemed tired, worn down by the weight of everything. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was looking at the same woman who had once been my partner, my best friend. I don't know what to do now, Nora said quietly, almost to herself. I don't know how we got here. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make her feel like there was still hope, like we could somehow go back to the way things were. But the truth was, I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how we got here, and I didn't know how to fix it. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in this limbo anymore. I couldn't keep living in a marriage that had no foundation left. Nora, I think we've tried everything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And nothing has changed. Her face tightened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue. But then she just exhaled slowly, like the air had been knocked out of her. Maybe it's time to stop pretending, she said, her voice heavy with resignation. The finality of her words hit me harder than I expected. It was like everything we had tried to ignore, everything we had pushed to the back of our minds, suddenly came crashing down. There was no more pretending, no more hope that things would magically get better. We had reached the end, and there was nothing left to do but face it. For a long time, we just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of what was happening sinking in. And in that silence, I realized that we had both been waiting for the other to make the first move, to take the first step. But now here we were. The first step had already been taken. The papers were on the table, and nothing would ever be the same again. I'm sorry, Nora whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I wanted to say something, anything, to make this easier, but the words wouldn't come. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, and now that it was here, I felt like I was losing everything. You don't need to apologize, I said, my voice thick with emotion. We're both to blame. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. But neither of us reached for the other. Neither of us made a move. We both knew that the time for making things work had passed. I guess this is it, I said quietly. And for the first time in years, it felt like I could finally breathe. I wasn't sure when it happened, but something inside me had shifted. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Nora I'd known and loved. She wasn't the Nora I thought I was trying to save. Somewhere along the way, we both had become strangers. We had become two people trapped in a marriage neither of us truly wanted to fight for anymore. The silence was deafening now. There was no anger between us, no shouting, no blaming. Just nothing. Just an empty space that had once been filled with shared moments, laughter, love. She sat down at the kitchen table, eyes distant. I stood, unsure whether to sit next to her or leave. There was something final about this moment. Something unspoken that neither of us seemed to want to acknowledge directly, but it was there. I guess I should sign the papers, she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was flat, drained of any emotion. I don't even know what I'm waiting for. The coldness in her voice hit me harder than I thought it would. This wasn't the same woman who had once laughed at my jokes, who had held me close during the long nights. This was someone else entirely. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything was finally too much to bear. Maybe I wasn't the only one who had been pretending. You don't have to sign them, I said, surprising myself with the words. Not yet. If you want time, I can give you time. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. Time for what? For things to magically fix themselves? For you to suddenly decide you want to keep fighting for something that's already fallen apart? Her voice was sharp now, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at everything we had both ignored for far too long. I didn't have an answer, because, deep down, I knew she was right. We had both been waiting for something to change, for something to wake us up from this numbness we had allowed to creep into our lives. But the truth was, nothing was going to change. Not unless we made a choice. She stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. I should have known this was coming. We've been in this rut for too long. You've been waiting for me to make the move, and I've been waiting for you to grow a backbone. The words stung, but they were true. I had been waiting, hoping that one day things would just fall back into place. But that wasn't how life worked. Not anymore. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the feeling of dread that crept up my spine. I had been avoiding this moment for months, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that the tension would blow over. But it hadn't. And now, standing in front of Nora, I couldn't deny it any longer. You're right, I said quietly. I've been afraid. I've been afraid of the consequences, afraid of being alone. But I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep pretending. Her face softened for a moment, and I saw something in her eyes that made my heart ache. It was the same look she had when we first met, the look that made me fall in love with her. I didn't want this, she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to reach out, to tell her that it wasn't too late, that we could still fix this. But I knew better. We were both past the point of fixing. What we had was broken beyond repair. She reached for the divorce papers, her hands trembling just slightly. As she picked them up, I couldn't help but wonder if this was really the end. If this moment would define the rest of our lives. I'll sign them, she said, her voice steady now, as if she had already made her peace with what was about to happen. But only if you're sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But I knew one thing for certain. Staying in this marriage, holding on to something that wasn't there, was only going to destroy both of us. I'm sure, I said, my voice almost a whisper. With that, she signed the papers. And in that simple act, everything changed. The life we had built together, the hopes and dreams, the shared memories, gone in an instant. I watched her as she slid the papers back across the table toward me. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The finality of it was suffocating. This was it. The end. There would be no turning back. Are you happy now? She asked, her voice quiet, but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper seemed to echo through the empty room, the finality of it sinking in with every stroke. She signed her name without hesitation, but there was something hollow in the way she did it. No emotion, no fight, just the cold, deliberate motion of ending something that had been slowly dying for months. I watched her, unable to look away. The woman I once knew, the woman I had loved, was now a stranger. And yet, there was still a part of me that wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the edge. But I couldn't. I knew I couldn't. The line had been crossed. She pushed the papers back toward me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we had just done hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I took the papers slowly, as if holding them too quickly would shatter something delicate between us. But there was nothing delicate left. Is this really it? She asked quietly, her voice breaking through the silence. There was a hint of vulnerability in her question, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. I didn't know how to answer. Was this really it? Was there any way to go back? Could we turn back the clock to a time when things felt right? I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of her question settle in my chest. I don't know. I wish I had an answer. But I can't keep living in this, in between. We're both just waiting for something to change, but nothing ever does. She looked down at the papers, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the document. I don't know how we got here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't have the strength to tell her that we had both been pushing toward this for a long time. Maybe we hadn't wanted to admit it, but we had both been walking toward this moment for months, if not years. Neither did I said quietly, my voice hoarse. But sometimes, the hardest part isn't admitting it. It's letting go. The words felt like a punch to the gut. They were true, but they were also something I wasn't ready to face. Letting go meant accepting that we had both failed. Letting go meant facing the truth that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't fix what was broken. Nora stood up from the table, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look at me as she gathered her things, her coat, her purse. I couldn't bring myself to stop her, to ask her to stay, to do anything that would change the course of this conversation. Are you leaving? I asked, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't turn to face me. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then, just as she was about to walk out, she looked back over her shoulder. I don't know, she said quietly, but I think we both need some space. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. And then she was gone. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had just been. The weight of her absence filled the room, suffocating me in a way I couldn't describe. I felt lost, alone, but also free. It was a strange mix of emotions, like a part of me had been severed, but another part was slowly beginning to heal. I glanced at the divorce papers on the table. The signature on them was mine, hers, and now, the end. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to live without her, without the life we had built. But I knew one thing. It was time to stop being afraid. Time to stop living in the past, holding on to something that wasn't coming back. I picked up the papers, folded them carefully, and slipped them into a drawer. This chapter of my life was over. And though I didn't know what the future held, for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for something new. The days after Nora left felt like a fog had settled over everything. I went through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but none of it felt real. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was a heavy silence, the kind that fills every corner with the sound of what's unsaid. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something essential. But at the same time, I felt a strange, hollow relief. I hadn't expected it to hit so hard. I thought I'd be relieved, even a little bit proud of myself for finally pulling the trigger, for making the hard choice. But when it actually happened, when she walked out and didn't look back, I felt like I was losing part of myself. Like I had just handed over the last piece of something I had invested everything into. I tried calling her the next day. I knew it wasn't going to change anything, but I had this strange hope that she might pick up and tell me she had made a mistake, that she wasn't sure about leaving. But the phone just rang, and I was left with nothing but the dial tone. It was then that I realized she had moved on. She was already a step ahead, already letting go of the life we had built. And it hurt. God, it hurt. But I couldn't admit it. I couldn't let myself sink into the despair of it all. So, I did what any person would do when they didn't know how to cope. I buried myself in work. I buried myself in anything that would stop me from thinking about her, about us. The hours bled together, and before I knew it, days had passed without me really realizing it. Then one evening, just as I was finishing up some paperwork, I got a message. It was from Nora. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. I hadn't heard from her since she left. She hadn't even responded to my calls. Why now? What had changed? I stood up, pacing around the room, the message burning a hole in my mind. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep walking forward, to keep moving on. But the other part of me, the part that had once loved her, still ached. I couldn't stop myself. I picked up the phone and typed out a response. Sure. When and where? It didn't take long for her to reply. Tomorrow. My place. 6 p.m. I had no idea what she wanted, no idea what she was hoping to say. But something in me knew that this conversation was inevitable, that sooner or later, we would have to confront what we had both been avoiding. The next evening, I found myself standing outside her apartment, my hands sweaty, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but part of me thought that seeing her again might bring back some of the feelings we had shared. Or maybe, just maybe, she would say that she made a mistake. I rang the doorbell. The sound was jarring, cutting through the silence of the evening. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was, Nora. She looked the same, but different. Her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was messier than usual, and her clothes were more casual than I remembered. But there was something else in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I hesitated, but then walked in, the familiar smell of her apartment hitting me like a punch in the stomach. It felt like nothing had changed, but everything had. We sat down on the couch in silence for a few moments, neither of us knowing how to begin. Finally, Nora spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. "About us. About everything." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what she had to say. Part of me wanted to be angry, to accuse her of leading me on, of making me believe that we could still fix things. But the other part of me, the part that still cared about her, just wanted to know the truth. "I never wanted it to end like this," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "But I think I think I've been running from myself for so long that I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness. There was only the quiet sadness of someone who had lost themselves along the way. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I don't even know if I can." I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that it was okay, that maybe we could try again. But deep down, I knew that we had already reached the point of no return. We couldn't fix it. Not anymore. "It's not your fault," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "We both let it slip. We both let it fall apart." Nora looked at me then, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who had once stood beside me through everything. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone else, someone who was just as lost as I was. "I don't know where to go from here," she said softly, her voice breaking. I didn't know either, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe again. It wasn't the answer I wanted, and it wasn't the answer I thought I'd get, but it was the truth. And sometimes, that was all we could hope for. The days after that conversation were a blur, but one thing was clear. Something inside me had shifted. The weight that had settled on my chest for so long, the constant fear and doubt, was slowly lifting. Nora and I had shared our truth, and while it wasn't the reunion I had secretly hoped for, it was the closure I desperately needed. I focused on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I didn't rush into anything new, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally living for myself. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends, and took care of things I had neglected. Then, a few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a mutual friend, Anna, who had always been close to both Nora and me. She hesitated before speaking, and I could tell something was off. "Hey, I didn't know if you knew, but I think Nora's been seeing someone else. And it's serious." I wasn't shocked at first. Part of me had suspected it for a while. Nora had distanced herself so much, and I had seen the signs. But hearing it from Anna was different. It was confirmation. "She's been spending a lot of time with this guy, Jake. I don't know all the details, but it's been going on for a few weeks. I just thought you should know." I felt a mix of emotions. Anger? Yes, but more than that, I felt free. I wasn't angry at Nora anymore. I had accepted what we had, and I knew it wasn't meant to be. But the irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. She had moved on so quickly, and now, it seemed, her new relationship wasn't even as stable as the one we'd had. For the first time, I didn't feel a shred of regret. What we had was over, and I had no desire to go back. But part of me couldn't help but wonder, how long would it last? How long would Jake stick around? How long before Nora's pattern of running away from what truly mattered came back to bite her? A few months later, I heard the news. Nora and Jake weren't together anymore. Turns out, Jake wasn't exactly who she thought he was. After a few weeks, Nora found out that he had been seeing someone else behind her back, just like she had been doing to me. The karma of it all wasn't lost on me. It was almost poetic. It wasn't that I wanted to see her hurt, but it was hard not to feel a sense of vindication. Nora had spent so long running from her problems, jumping from one relationship to another, avoiding the truth. And in the end, it was her own actions that led her to the same lonely place I had found myself in not long ago. Months passed, and my life continued moving forward. One day, I received a text from Nora. It was simple, nothing dramatic. "I messed up. I'm sorry." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. I wasn't sure what she expected from me. The old me might have rushed to reply, might have felt guilty or asked questions. But I didn't feel that anymore. I wasn't the man I had been when we were together. I had grown, I had changed, and I had learned to live for myself. I typed back, slowly but steadily. "I know you are. And that's all that matters now." She didn't respond. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had finally let go, not just of her, but of everything she represented. The pain, the disappointment, the fear. And in its place, there was a sense of freedom. I had learned the hard way that holding on to something broken only hurt you more in the end. And while I couldn't change the past, I could control how I moved forward. And moving forward, I was determined to make the most of my life, without regrets, without fear.